Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Can you hear me? I'm always suspicious of mics. You can. Good. Sit, please. I'm going to introduce my speaker in a bit, but I just want to begin by saying what an honor and a pleasure it is to be at an ABP summit. As some of you may know, ABP was my home for many, many years. I learnt most of my journalism at ABP, and to be here and to see the next generation taking over and doing such a fabulous job makes me very proud. So a big hand for everyone's organizers. I also want to thank my friend Mohit Roy Sharma, who I've known for 21 years, who drags me out whenever I say, Mohit, I've done too many summits, I've done too much. He drags me out and he always gets me here. So wherever you are, Mohit, thank you, I'm here for you. Which brings us to our speaker. Now, you probably have heard of him, you've probably heard of the group. What you may not know is this, that when I lived in Calcutta, the Goenkas were pretty much, apart from the Birlas, the royal family of the city. They were people who'd created things out of nothing. His great-grandfather had something in a family shareholding, in a family division, which was not great. But between his great-grandfather and especially his grandfather, they created an empire that I think surprised everyone. His grandfather, RP Goenka, did many things nobody had done before. He took over existing foreign companies. He took over government-owned corporations like CSC. He ran them to a very high standard. I knew him well. He was like a legend in his time, and I learnt a lot from him. You would think that with a man like that, it would be difficult for anyone to follow in his footsteps. But Shashwat's very lucky because his father has more than built on the legacy that he was left by his ancestors and turned their group into like the biggest group in Calcutta, one of the biggest groups in India, the envy of everyone for their ability to move with the times. So obviously the question to you is going to be, what does it feel like to be standing on the shoulders of such giants?
So first and foremost, thank you so much for having me here. It's an absolute honor and such a pleasure to be doing this with you, Peter. So I think when I look at my family history, right, it spans almost 220 years now where we've been in business, right? And each generation has come in and built on what they've kind of inherited in a way, right? And more importantly, they've diversified, they've stayed ahead of the times, the competition, etc., to kind of continuously reinvent. And I think when you look at the last 3-4 generations you spoke about, my great-grandfather, my grandfather, dad, I think each one of them has done that, right? Right from at some point being the sole bankers to the East India Company in the 1800s to running textile companies to, my great-grandfather being the first chairman of the State Bank of India, to my grandfather, as you said, acquiring companies, dad continuing the legacy. And for us, it's always been a story of reinvention, a story of how do you take what you have to make it even bigger, to create more shareholder value. And, our tagline also, interestingly, is growing legacies. Yeah. And I think that's the business that we are in.
That really sums up what your group is like. Huh? Now, I want to go back slightly into history. Around the time that your grandfather got into business, the tradition was that the big Calcutta companies did not do consumer-facing businesses. They did B2B stuff. Your family changed that. There's so many of your business consumer things. Plus, you've gone into retail and stuff like that. So tell us a bit about that. What was it like?
Sure. This is somewhere around 2012 when we decided, which is when I came back from college, and we said, the core of our group is B2B businesses, like you said. And we said that when we look at the next 20 years, we want to redefine what RPSG is and create it to be one of India's, if not India's leading, one of the leading consumer conglomerates in the country and then globally as well. And so we said we look at all our core businesses and how do we convert them from being purely B2B to either B2C or B2B2C,
Yeah.
right? And how do we kind of diversify and get into more consumer businesses? So whether it was retail, whether it was FMCG, where we launched India's fastest growing snacks brand.
Yeah.
We've even launched a few personal care brands as well, an Ayurveda brand, to looking at the expansion into media and into sports as well.
But, I mean, I use the term Marwadi hesitantly, but to launch for a Marwadi company, to launch the best-selling snacks, fastest-growing snacks brand, it's pretty historic, right? It's never been done before.
I mean, I don't think it matters which sector community you come from. It
All
really
right.
is about the business mind that you have and what you want to create with what you have.
So, do you think, therefore, though I know you say it doesn't matter, that many of the other old Calcutta families who were in business are now moving with the times?
Absolutely. And I think today location is just a factor of, I mean, your history or your heritage or where you're
Yeah.
living. But I think everyone is now looking at not just a city, but you're looking at a country and you're looking at the world. And for us at RPSG, it's no different, right? We are, like I said, for 200 years,
Yeah.
we've been in Calcutta. And that's our heritage, that's our home, that's our roots, right? But we're investing across the country, we're investing globally. We are creating businesses for the world. So I think location is just, it may give you your heritage and a starting point,
Yeah.
but it doesn't define who you are in any way.
And particularly in the modern world where communication and markets
Absolutely.
are so open.
Absolutely.
So now you deal a lot with the young consumer, yeah? So tell me how you see the young Indian consumer. What are your learnings?
So, you know, there's something very interesting about the Indian consumer, and this is from all I, experience in retail that I say this, is the Indian consumer is unlike any other consumer anywhere in the world, right? Where globally, a country has a very homogeneous tastes and preferences of consumers. The Indian consumers' tastes and preferences change every 100 kilometers in our country. And when you look at it, we're not one country. We're many states, many countries, and even within states and cities, like I said, every 100 kilometers, there is a new dialect that people speak. There are different food preferences, for example, that people have. There are different consumption habits, right? And I think that's what makes the uniqueness of India. And when I look at the young Indian consumer, and I think today 70% of India is under the age of 35, and they are going to be that next consuming class in a way, right? And I think when you really look at them, the original concepts that we used to back in the 90s, at least when I was growing up, initially you get into savings, then you get into, you'll buy yourself a car, you'll buy yourself a house, you look at all of that. I think that whole approach has changed now, where consumers today want a lot more instant gratification, and there is, the aspirational levels of consumers have risen a lot, and they are willing to spend that extra amount to kind of live that aspiration today versus saving it up for a aspirational future.
So they're different from their parents in that respect.
Absolutely.
So when you talk about the food business, the snacks business, how does that impact your decisions?
So I think one is just the way people buy has changed, right? From going to a typical kirana store or your pan shop outside your home, or to a hawker on the street, to going to either modern trade stores or e-commerce. And over the last 4 years, I think quick commerce is something that's at least in tier 1 cities today taken on. And so there are different ways that we look at how do we grow our distribution when I look at the food business. And it's not just a matter of how many outlets now, but it's a matter of how many touch points of a consumer when they shop can you kind of be available at. And one statistic I'll share with you is, 5 years ago we said that people purchased food and grocery 12 times in a month.
Okay.
Today, it's very different. Today, an average household of 4 in a tier 1 city places 10 orders on a Sunday, 10 different orders on a quick commerce app.
Really?
Yeah. And so that's the difference on how it's changed. So you're looking at things like continuous supply chain availability. You're looking at being listed on all the right platforms, all the stores. You're looking at what are the taste profiles of consumers. And today consumers are a lot more experimental, they are a lot more globally aware and exposed as well. And so they are willing to try new things. And I think so those are the insights that we look at when we kind of create products and we
That's
build out
very
our
fascinating.
FMCG.
Give me an example of a product you've created and what went into it.
Sure. So plenty, right? So I'll tell you the journey of Tuyam, right?
Yeah.
And you know, we identified healthy snacking as a space back in 2017 when we decided to launch. And at that point, it was more of a general global macro trend. We weren't seeing it in India, but we said we are going to create this market in India. And we had launched with makhanas, which at that time was native to certain parts of India, but it was not a countrywide known snack. The benefits of it were not known, right? And so we entered the market with it, and I think we were able to create the right noise.
I'm going to stop you. Step one, why makhanas? Because makhanas you will go and buy at a local kirana shop or from a street stall, but it never occurs to anyone to package them. You guys made that leap, so why did you do that?
Sure. So you know, snacks is a 50,000 crore market and growing, right? Western snacks. And when you look at it, a lot of that consumption, when you look at the branded consumption, was very small part of it, right? And it was a cluttered market. So for us, the entry strategy was very clear that if we enter with products like potato chips or bhujia, which are already well entrenched, there are well entrenched players in the market, we are not going to be able to make a mark. And will people be interested in looking at a healthy version of that in 2017, right? And so we said, let's go on the extreme end of the health spectrum and pick products which are inherently healthy, but people don't consume them either because it's not easily available, or it's just not something that's available in tasty flavors, right? And which is why when we launched the brand and we said we are taking the entire health spectrum, we named the brand Tuyam, which is counterintuitive to when you think something is healthy, right? You think it will not taste good, right? And what we did is we said, we will be healthy, but we will also ensure that taste is what is going to trump everything, right? And because when you snack, it is your guilty pleasure, it is your indulgence, and you want it to be something that you enjoy. It's not that you're eating it because
so deliciousness is number one.
Absolutely. Okay. Absolutely. So for us, that was one. Second was, you know, how do you consistently ensure that you are coming up with new flavors in that product? Because consumers don't necessarily, you know, classic salted, etc. are flavors you can have on a daily basis. But when you look at unique flavors, and we had launched flavors like wasabi, you know, during even during the Navratri period, we had launched a limited edition rice kheer flavor of makhana. You know, so these were innovations that we did. And for us, we said flavor innovation and product innovation is going to be one of the forefronts of how we are going to create this business.
I'm going to stop you here. There were multinationals already in the packaged food business, many of them reproducing products that they sold abroad, adding maybe masala twist or something to an existing product. You were the first guys who created unique Indian products. So what gave you the courage to do that?
So I think going back to all our understanding of consumer and Indian consumers and consumption is the Indian consumer is not trying to ape the West or the Southeast for that matter, right? And you know, inherently Indians have very Indian ways of consuming things, right? You know, and a typical Indian wants chai the way we drink it. They want to eat that samosa with the chai, you know? And these are things that are, I think, almost in our DNA, right? So they've been built over generations, and you know, so people still want that flavor. They want the punch of flavor when they eat or when they snack, but they're also becoming conscious about healthy eating, clean eating, and they're looking for better alternatives out there. And I think that's the pivot we made. So while we launched with makhana, one of the pivots, so today we don't sell makhanas anymore, right? Because we realized that it was too far end of the health spectrum, and people were like, we want to be healthier, and so we want a healthier alternative. We don't necessarily want health foods when it comes to snacking, right? And so we pivoted. So today we do healthier bhujiyas, we do healthier chips.
How do you do a healthier bhujia?
So our bhujia is 45% less saturated fat than anything else that's available on the shelf.
Really, that much difference?
Yeah.
Do people realize that? I mean,
absolutely. We are very strong with it on our communication. And what we've done is we've ensured that, you know, and we've done series of blind tests with our consumers to ensure that our product succeeds on taste, texture, profile above everything else that's available. And I think that's the reason we've been able to be successful.
But you're going up against multinationals which have had hundreds of years of experience, which have products that they've tried abroad, etc. Was that at all daunting doing that?
I would say yes and no.
Okay.
Of course, there have been enough players, both MNCs and Indian players, who've been in the market for very long. Indian players like ITC, Indian players like Haldiram's, right? And they've created the market for snacking or packaged snacking in India, right? But I think what kind of one, of course, you know, what kind of prevented, in a way you could say, is like, it was daunting to say that, okay, you're going to be fighting against them or in the same market as them. So how are you going to get market share? What will you do to create the trust with the consumer? But at the same time, I think what helped us was the fact that we didn't have any baggage. We were able to be very agile with our decisions, very quick with our decisions, and very experimental. We didn't have a base that we needed to protect, right? We could create anything. We could fail, and we could learn from those failures and bounce back very quickly.
In a sense, you were a startup.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Things like distribution, from the time you even thought of it to now, it's changed dramatically as you were explaining. How does one keep up with those technological developments?
So I think today technology is changing. You know, 10 years ago it was changing every year. Today it's changing every day, right? And so it becomes imperative on all of us to stay abreast of what's happening with technology across the world, not just in your market, but across the world. And seeing which of those technologies, what can you firstly learn from them? How do you kind of adapt to them? And I think most importantly, how do you get your organization to be aware and adapt to them? Because the entire organization needs to start working in different ways. And those ways are changing very quickly. They are being disrupted very quickly. And so there's no two ways about, you know, it's not an option of should I or should I not. You have to. And you kind of have to do it very quickly.
Which is difficult, surely.
Absolutely. Yeah. But who said business or doing business is easy? So
okay. One of the other things you said at the beginning was that the first thing when you're dealing with the Indian consumer is, remember, there's no such thing as the Indian consumer. There are families of consumers in such a vast country with different tastes and different things. Give me an example of the kind of variations you see.
So one is, I'll give you an example of an individual family in itself, right?
Okay.
If you look at the 90s when I was growing up, right? The house had 1 or 2 TVs and people would consume entertainment, right? As a family. Today, everyone's on their personal
One
device.
TV, yeah? Your house may be 2 TVs, but
one to two, that's what, depending on, absolutely, right? And it was always a family activity. Today, you have a family who's sitting in the same room and everyone's on their personal devices. Because data is so accessible, everyone has a personal device. And so consumption has changed in that way, not just in the food space, but even in the entertainment space. And I think it's across every space, right? Even when you look at services, for example, all of it has changed.
Looking going forward, I think it's a reasonable assumption that technology will keep changing the game. I'm more interested in your observations about demographics. You said, I thought that was very interesting, that the Indian consumer now is more educated than ever before, better traveled than ever before because of the internet, etc., more aware of what's happening internationally than ever before. And yet, he likes bhujia, he likes chai, he likes samosas. So explain that paradox.
So I'll explain 2 paradoxes to you, right? One is on the tastes and preferences, and second is how they purchase, depending on this, right? I think when you look at any culture, right, there are things that have been inherent to them over generations. So whether you look at Switzerland, for example, where people have consumed fondue and raclette over generations, and the current generation still consumes it despite all the health macro trends, right? I spoke about samosa and chai in India, you know, the US and coffee, for example. I think these are things that are, you know, they genuinely go into the DNA of cultures, and they kind of are built over generations in a way. And so they are not things that change very quickly. right? It's the nuance of how they get consumed and different forms and form factors in which you can consume them that changes. So I think that's where the Indian consumer is at also. They want new formats to consume, they want new products to consume, they want new services to consume, but they want it available to them in their inherent way of consuming. The base nature of how you eat or how you consume doesn't change for a demographic or a country or a geography, right? You know, so for example, in India, or you know, you are used to eating with your hands, whether
Right.
it's the roti, whether it's the rice, and that is something that is still inherent even today.
Yeah.
Even when you look at toddlers today, and I have a 4-year-old,
Yeah.
you know, her inherent way of eating is I want to eat with my hands, not with a
Right.
spoon. So that's what I'm saying. It's inherent in your DNA. Now coming to how they purchase as well,
Yeah.
right? Is, you know, the Indian consumer is you know, very dichotomous when it comes to consuming products that they think are international versus products that they think are everyday Indian, right?
Oh, that's interesting.
Um,
Explain that. Yeah.
I'll explain it, right? So, you know, when an Indian consumer, and we see this in our retail business, when an Indian consumer wants to purchase potatoes, onions, tomatoes, garlic, you know, they know the price of that. They
Okay.
will not pay even 50 paise or a rupee extra for it. They will want to get the hardest bargain on that. But when it comes to an imported wheel of truffle cheese, for example, they are willing to pay that extra mile for it because they know it's not easily available. You know, so that's also a very interesting dichotomy of which is very unique to the Indian consumer. And which is why when you even look at, say, quick commerce today, it works very well in tier 1 cities because people are weighing it with how much time will I save, because we are a time-starved nation,
Yeah.
right? And that's the reason India has been one of the few countries where this business has kind of caught on, and nowhere else in the world has quick commerce really caught on.
That's true. I hadn't thought of it that way.
Yeah.
So when they look at international products, they are slightly more flexible when it comes to price. Indian products, they're typically Indian in the way. What happens if there's an international type product packaged in India? Do they treat it as an international product or one of ours?
I think it's not about where the product is coming from.
It's the
about
kind of product.
It's the kind of product.
Okay, I get you.
Yeah.
Looking forward, if you look at this generation, there's been a lot of talk recently about whether they work hard enough, whether there's too much leisure. What is, and you study this generation for a living in a sense because demographics is your business. How do you think we're going to go forward? What are young people going to do as they grow older?
I think when it comes to work-life balance, essentially, right? I think it's important to have both. But it's also important to understand that there are times when you need to work more, and so you need to put in those additional hours, right? I don't think,
Okay, hang on. How many hours a day do you work?
I don't really count. I think we are working round the clock.
So between 18 to 20 is not unfair in your case, no?
I wouldn't put a
All
number to
right,
it, but
okay,
I would
okay,
say
right, yeah.
you're basically working the whole
Yeah,
time, right? Because
there's
that's,
no time when you're not working, no?
exactly, and that's like every entrepreneur, right?
Yeah.
Or every
Yeah.
person who's
Yeah.
working, because you're constantly thinking
Yeah.
about things for your work, things for your
Yeah.
business. What can you do differently? What can you do better tomorrow? How will you
And if you're
add
in the,
value?
if you're in the food business, travel, a meal outside, all of that is input, no?
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think, you know, so the way I look at it is, it's not about the number of hours you put in.
Okay.
It's about how productive you are with the work that you do, and are you able to make the difference. And it's not about, you know, checking a box that I work from 9 a.m. till like 2 a.m. You know,
Yeah.
it's really about what have you done in those hours you have worked.
Absolutely.
So
Do you
that's how I
think-
would
yeah.
look at it.
But you're an entrepreneur, and an entrepreneur, effectively, though you're from a business family, you started new businesses, and you've worked, as you say, around the clock, and you've seen early success. How have you maintained a work-life balance?
So I think, you know, again, I will go back to a thing like growing up, you
Yeah.
always heard of, you know, 9 to 5, 9 to 6. But I never saw that with my dad or my granddad. They were always working, right?
Yeah.
Having said that, they always still had time for us.
Yeah.
You know, there was never a time where I felt I was deprived of time with anybody because they were working too much.
That must have been tough for your dad because he was always traveling, building new things, but he still found time for the kids.
Absolutely, and I think for me also it's exactly the same. I think that's what I have seen, and the idea is, you know, you have to build and you have to create and you have to work, and you will work because that comes first. But having said that, you also have commitments to your family and to your wife and to your children and to your parents. And it's really about doing all of it simultaneously. And I think that's really how I do it.
Because the Goenkas are unusual in that all of you have a reputation for working round the clock. Yet you also have a reputation for being a close-knit, affectionate family that looks out for each other, which means you do manage to find the time.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. Do you think that young people here need to work harder? Because that's been said by a lot of people. Or do you think that this hard, not hard is perhaps missing the point, we just need to be more productive?
I think it really boils down to being more productive. And if you really look at it, I think back in 2012-13, there were hardly any startups and unicorns coming out of India. You look at that statistic today and it's many hundred times over, which is just a testament of the productivity and the hard work that the youth are putting in. So,
it's a question I always wonder about. People like you have come from generations of money. Yet when you look at lists of rich people in India, you guys are very high up, so I vote for that. But lots and lots of these billionaires are self-made people. A lot of them have done it not through manipulating the system, which was the traditional way to become self-made, but through technology, through innovation, How much pressure does that put on somebody like you, who has to keep your place and your family's place in an environment that's changing in terms of wealth creation?
I think for us, like when we started off, I said it's about growing the legacies that we have and creating new legacies for future generations, right? And so if you really look at also our group, each generation has of course grown what they've inherited.
And taken it into new areas.
Absolutely. And what they've also done is done their own startups and created their own businesses as well, right? So it's that way been not just preserving and growing what you inherit, but also creating your own legacy, creating your own businesses and growing those businesses. And I think that's what
was that drummed into you as kids? That's not enough to look after daddy's business when you're old enough. You have to make something of your own?
I think, again, when you look at it, whenever you look at family businesses and globally, there are case studies on this. They usually say, the first generation starts to create, the second generation builds, and the third generation destroys. Right? But when you look at
your generation 4, so that's worked out so far.
It depends on which
way you start counting.
It could be 7 or 8 as well if you look at the 200-year legacy. Right? And I think the reason why we've been able to, and a lot of family businesses in India particularly are able to kind of do this over centuries, is because they give each generation the freedom to create along with growing what they have. Right? And I think that's what kind of creates that. And second is, we've been very particular about ensuring that we're looking at, continuous growth, looking at competition closely, looking at ways of adopting technology as it changes, looking at ways of, how do you kind of stay ahead of the curve always. And I think that is what kind of also allows us to kind of keep building, rebuilding, reinventing, recreating to ensure that you are moving with the times.
And it's working, right? The company continues to grow.
Touch wood.
Touch wood. Okay, I'm going to ask you just not quite rapid fire,
sure,
but a series of unrelated but related questions.
Okay.
Tell me one thing you remember about your grandfather, the legendary RP Goenka.
He was someone, and I remember observing this always while growing up. He could connect with someone who was 90 years old, and he could connect with someone who was 1 year old. And each of them equally loved him. So I think that was something that I remember, and that the power of being able to kind of find your space with no matter who it is that you're with, and making that comfortable, that person feels so comfortable. I think for me that is one thing that stays with me.
I know he's been friends with the Sarkars for years, and he used to talk to Arup and Avik, who ran the family business as friends. And I was like this young journalist who just joined, and he knew all my bosses. But he spoke to me in exactly the same way, with the same respect, took the same interest in what I was doing, which is a real knack.
Yeah,
no? It's a real gift.
Absolutely.
Okay. One of your father, one memory.
I mean, I have a
you
lot.
You have thousands, but give me one. Give me one.
Absolutely. But I think one thing that I spoke about earlier as well is I've always remembered he had time for us, despite all the things he did. You know, I had friends who would always complain that they don't see their fathers for, you know, weeks at a stretch, whatever it is, right? And I feel like for us, he was always there. He's always there even today. He's such a strong guiding force for me. And I think that is what I think.
You will.
Yeah, yeah.
Is there one quality he has that you wish you had?
There are plenty. And I think he's today over 60, and he's still so in touch with what is relevant, what is new. There are times when he's telling me about new technologies or new things that have been coming up, which you know he's already tried to use and whatever. So I think that continuous ability to keep learning. And no matter the age, no matter the experience you have, to continuously be okay to say, okay, this is something new that I don't know, I will learn about it, and I will be better tomorrow than I am today. I think for me that is something that...
He's also very sharp-witted or quick-witted. If you ask him a question, there will always be an answer immediately. He won't take time to think about it. And you've inherited that, no? Judging by today's session.
I don't know.
Okay. Let's keep the rapid fire going. A business person not from your family who you admire.
I think Mr. Mukesh Ambani, without
Explain
any
to me
question.
why.
Yeah. So, you know, he is again someone who, of course, inherited stuff that Mr. Dhirubhai had built, but he is someone who has such a far-reaching vision and such precision execution, right? Where no matter what it is that he decides to do, he does it fabulously, meticulously, down to the smallest detail. And I think despite all of that, he is someone who has so much humility. He is someone who is affectionate and respectful to absolutely everyone, right? And so I think that is something that I really admire in him. His ability to, one, think big, think not today, but think years ahead of the times, and then to actually execute on each one of those.
Yeah. He said, no, if Reliance enters a business, it must change the industry when the time it's through. And how many businessmen can say that and have pulled it off? No?
Absolutely.
Which is a considerable achievement. Okay, international businessman, one person you admire.
One person.
More difficult, but...
Yeah, there are quite a few. But let me start by saying Elon Musk, right? And I'll tell you why, right? What I really like about him is the courage of conviction that he has on his ideas, right? And even he has that innate ability to be able to execute, you know, the ideas that he has. And despite some of those ideas not maybe meeting popular culture or popular perception or popular acceptance in a way, right? He still has that strong courage of conviction. And I think that is something that I look up to him for.
And he's the richest man in the world, and he's made his money in businesses that 30 years ago did not exist.
Absolutely.
So he's really at the forefront of how things are changing. Yourself 15 years from now, where do you want to be? I bet you haven't thought about that, but
no,
think about it.
I think when I look at myself 15 years from now, I'd like to be someone who's been able to continuously learn, continuously innovate, continuously reinvent myself, my family, and my businesses to still stay relevant at that time. Because, you know, when you really look at it, you don't know what the world's going to be 15 years from now, right? So the only thing that I can do today is ensure that we continuously have a culture of resilience, create in ourselves the ability to learn, unlearn, relearn, and learn new, and keep doing that again and again and again.
You were born rich. I think there's no secret in that. But you were also born into a family that had great respect for culture, for cultural values. The first time I saw Nusrat Fateh Ali Khan performing, your grandfather had organized it. There's always been that. Is that a balance you've tried to maintain?
Absolutely. I think that's something that comes innately to us. And for us, that is a core part of our being as well, which is, you know, preserving and growing India's rich cultural heritage.
And that's always been your grandfather and your father put their money where their mouth was, eh? So
Yeah.
you've really done this, yeah?
Yeah.
And you're going to keep that tradition up?
Absolutely. I would hope to. I would like to.
All right. I think you can see how much they've listened to you in pin drop silence. That's been a very impressive session. Thank you so much, and I think we wish you luck.
Thank you so much. Thank you.